Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawai'i, what struggles remain for women in the workplace. Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawai'i. I'm Mahealani Richardson, a host for Insights on PBS Hawai'i. Women make up nearly half of Hawaii's workforce, yet are paid only 82% of their male counterparts' wages. While the gap is smaller than when the Equal Rights Amendment passed, men and women still don't get paid the same amount for this same work. This comes despite the fact that more women than men go to college and are branching out into a variety of fields, including those once dominated by men. Meanwhile, they're still taking on the brunt of the responsibility for their homes and families. What struggles remain for women in the workplace? We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Now to our panel. Coralie Matayoshi is a mother of 3 and the regional CEO for the American Red Cross Hawaii and Pacific Islands chapters. She's also a member of the University of Hawaii Board of Regents. Jerry Hayes is the CEO of Office Pavilion, one of the most successful women-owned businesses in Hawaii. She founded the company and raised 2 daughters as a single mother. Richie Keltz is a captain in the Honolulu Fire Department. She is the 3rd female captain in the history of the department. Richie is a single mother with 7 children. And Teresa Bill is the coordinator for the University of Hawaii's Bridge to Hope, a program for students on welfare who attend the university. She also lectures at the UH Women's Studies Department, teaching a course on women and work. Richie, I'm going to start off with you because as I gave the introduction, some of our panelists...
We all gasped.
We all had a little bit of a gasp. You raised 7 children. A couple of them are still in school right now. How do you manage to do it all with your work schedule?
Well, at that time when I was married, we both worked separate jobs, so we were a merged family. And when he was working, I wasn't, and vice versa. So we actually worked it together.
Jerry, and it takes you've raised children on your own too. What did it take to raise children and have your own business at the same time?
I started the business as they were older, so it wasn't quite as demanding. For me, I started the business maybe more to keep me busy after they got older and didn't need me. But I was a single parent for almost their whole life, but it had a lot of support systems and friends and family.
And women in Hawaii are making less than men. What do you make of that pay inequity?
Oh, I think I think we've all accepted it. We just it's been part of our, as a woman who employs people, I try obviously to have parity in pay for sure, but as an employee in my past life, I realized it and it was just the way it was. And half the time you didn't know because they wouldn't, you weren't allowed access to other people's pay scales, so you didn't find out till later that you were the low woman on the totem pole.
And Teresa, you teach this. You teach this course on women and pay.
Yes,
in the workplace.
I do, and actually I think that both Richie and Jerry's experiences are not uncommon in that women choose to either start their own businesses. Hawaii has a lot of small businesses, and sometimes when your employer isn't able to accommodate you, if you're able to start a business, that helps. And then also women look to non-traditional jobs for increased pay, and that's one way that women are able to have more equitable pay. So.
I mean, there's a variety of reasons why women are paid less in the islands.
There are. I think basically what it comes down to is after you take out all of the other factors, there's still about 10 to 15% of pay is unaccountable for other than discrimination. And I think some of it's just cultural in terms of our expectations about what we expect female workers to do and what we expect their male counterparts to do.
Mm-hmm. Coralie, you've had to learn a lot of tough lessons from the boardroom to running a nonprofit. What did you have to learn about pay and fighting for equality?
Well, as a lawyer, we do have some negotiating skills, so that helps. I think that as women become more educated and there's more women at the top, it will help. But the bottom line, though, is it's how society views women in the workplace. And I brought a demonstrative exhibit with me. This is a beautiful, cute photo picture from China that my managing partner brought for me. I was the only woman in the law firm, and I got this one. I had a three-month-old baby at the time, but my two counterparts were male, and they got warriors. And I was a litigator too, so I had really mixed feelings about this. I love this. I would never trade being a mom, but I wondered why they viewed me like that. And you know, I'm a litigator too.
It's interesting because, you know, in the 70s and the 80s, a lot of women had to almost be like men in the workforce, and now we see things a little differently. Richie, why don't you talk about being one of the few women in HFD, the Honolulu Fire Department? You're there's 1,100 firefighters, right? And now there's only about a dozen female firefighters?
It's what I've been doing for 21 years, so I really don't know any different. Working with men, you know, I just know there's a difference. Men's humor is different, but
Right.
a lot.
How does your presence change the dynamic of the workplace?
I think they might excuse themselves more, you know, for what they said or bodily functions. But basically, if I wasn't in the room, then, you know, they kid around a lot more. So I think they try to be a little more respectful, because men, they like to kid around and tease each other a lot. And other than that, I don't know. It's just what I've been doing for so long. I really don't know the difference. I've never had to work with a bunch of women, but I hear that, you know, there's a big difference when women work with women. Maybe there might be a little more drama. I'm not really sure, honestly.
Well, Jerry, why don't you talk about that? You manage men and women, and do your employees perhaps see you differently as a female boss?
Oh yeah, I definitely think one of the things I've noticed over 28 years I've owned a company, and it's really funny. I found a lot of my young installers, and I swear to God, some of them I said, "Did I hire you before you were legal age?" But they all call me Mama, and it was kind of weird. On the other hand, I found that with the women, you get a lot of transference about their mothers or how they, you know, so there's a very different dynamic, and also that I've always been described as very tough but fair, and I think it's hard. I can be pretty tough, and I think you're not judged the same way. If I was a man, I know I would never have heard or had some of the responses that I've had from employees, and particularly, and you know, you try to be nurturing and supportive at the same time. You know, you got a job to do, and it's a very difficult line to walk. But I found, like I say, with my young men installers, who now one of them's been with me for 27 years, and I just really realized, you know, that they just see you're more of a mother figure.
What about on the flip side? Is it fair that perhaps some people might see a female CEO or a female boss as maybe a negative attribute, whereas a male boss might be just seen as, let's say, demanding?
Oh yeah, I definitely know for a fact that that because I am, I've always joked that I'm very male, and I like you said, I think coming in the 70s you really developed, and to be successful and I'm from Boston, so I'm a very aggressive woman to begin with, and so I had to tone it down a lot to even manage to be out here.
Although you were in charge of your own business, though, so you could do it, and I think that's why women do branch out to be their own bosses. If you were trying to climb the corporate ladder, you might have had to bite your tongue a few more times than not, right?
I wouldn't be.
You probably wouldn't.
I wouldn't be able to talk. I would have had to bite my tongue off. No, so I think that's one of the reasons I started a business. I really had reached a point when I realized I'm quite outspoken, and I'm very, like I said, Boston girls are very direct, and we cut right to the chase. And so
Teresa, you mentioned some cultural differences in terms of actually the culture and the climate here in the islands, in terms of a difference for men and women in the workplace.
Well, I was thinking about when we talked about what do women need, and part of this is our own communities to change our cultural expectations for men and women. And I think we had a little bit about what the topic was going to be tonight, and there are some organizations that are looking for and doing research on how do we encourage employers, businesses, employees to be able to both to do that family and work balance, and to be able to, what I call, how to help women sort of juggle better, but also how to take some things off women's plates,
right,
and encourage men to participate in more family care, and for our cultural changes, for us to have acceptance and understanding that that's something for parents, not just mothers to do.
Right.
So.
Coralie, you have an interesting story about how you raised your kids and you climbed the corporate ladder yourself, doing it with your kids at the same time.
But it's because, and Connie Lau always says this as well about her husband Russell, if I didn't have such a great husband, I wouldn't be here. And he was, you know, not so great in the beginning, but I whipped him into shape. But you know, he realized that if anybody was going to climb the ladders, that we had to be equal at home. There's just no way we can do it all, and society shouldn't expect it. And actually, it's better for the whole of society if we allow men to be able to take time off. I mean, it shouldn't be looked down upon that men take paternity leave. It shouldn't be a joke. It should be encouraged, and it's hard for men too. It's not only women.
It sounds very much like the themes that Sheryl Sandberg was talking about in the book Lean In.
Yes, it is. You know, she said that a truly equal world would be where women ran half of our countries and companies, and men ran half of our homes. We're way far away from that.
We are so far
We
away.
are very far away.
And why is it that, you know, women still have to shoulder the burden of the cooking and the cleaning, even if they're running a company?
I think women at home try to control the home, and if it's not done their way, then we're not happy.
True. It's part our fault.
And so then we might say, well, you didn't do it the way I like it to be done, so then it'd be easier to say, you know what, just go ahead and do it.
So it's a two-way street.
It is. You have to accept the way it's done by someone else and not control how they're going to do it.
But of course, you have to have the guy even initiate it. You know? And some people don't.
That's true. Or else you just ask your children to do it.
Or you let him off the hook when the underwear is pink. He said he has to wear it too.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I think younger adults now have expectations about contributing, and that young men as well as young women are capable of laundry, cooking, and caring for their siblings. And the key is to encourage that not to end when they have their own sort of nuclear family.
Teresa, we have some very successful women sitting right here at this table. Does that mean there are fewer challenges in the workplace for women because of the examples that we have here?
I don't think there's fewer challenges. I think it's nice to see that women are able to achieve visible positions of leadership, because I think women have always exerted leadership. It's whether or not they were able to be the CEO or to be tapped for it. I think women have a lot more opportunities now, but there's still lots of challenges.
And you work specifically with students who are on welfare.
Yes,
correct?
I work with very low-income students, and most of them are single parents. So they are participating in higher education as their pathway to more prosperous ability to support their families. So, and they also, I can say with the families that I work with, if they have a support system that can help them, it's enormously impactful, so that when somebody is by themselves trying to juggle their childcare by themselves, it's very, very difficult. So.
And childcare, is that a major obstacle for most people?
I think everybody here would say.
I'd say it's the big one on the
It's
table.
the big one.
Yeah. If this country was like Scandinavia, where they really have these, they truly honor families and children and support them. Instead, it's our problem. It's always considered your problem to provide health care, and like I know with your population, because I was one of them, trying to go back to school and juggle an education, and you still had to work a certain number of hours, and you had to still, and then you had all these other obligations, and the society does not support it in any way, shape, or form. It's really, it's so detrimental. I think there's such a disincenting for these young people. And like you said, here, at least in Hawaii, there's much more of an ohana where people, if they have family, people contribute, whereas, like I said, back in Boston, it didn't happen. You were really on your own.
But it's the woman though. It's our burden though.
It is.
And men can be just a helper. And people say, "Oh, you're so lucky. Your husband helps." Well, I'd love to just be the helper and not have to worry about the dishes and the laundry and all of that stuff. You do all that, and you're not a great mom. They don't even think about it, But a man can coach soccer or mow the lawn once a month and take the garbage out, once a week, and they're just so fantastic.
I tell
So
one.
Curly, why do you think there are still few CEOs out there? Is it just too difficult to reach that height?
I think that women also take themselves back too because we feel guilty. So we're not going to go golfing. We're not going to go after drinking with the boys or whatever. And that is important for business because it is networking and getting to establish relationships for business. But we know that when you're doing that, you're not with your kids. Men don't have that obstacle in their guilt. Right, it is guilt.
Richie, did you have guilt?
I'm not one to do the partying after, and I think I never really socially networked a lot during my career with the firefighters. I rarely go to retirement parties and rarely go to promotion parties. I try to show up once in a while, but basically I feel like I need to go home to my kids.
Oh, you have seven.
At that time, and it was only 10 years of my life that I was raising more. Right now I only have 2 at home, and I still feel just as guilty and wanting to spend time with my children. And financially here, economically, we work more than one job. Right. And I'm working more than one job right now, and I feel like every time that I have time off, I want to spend time with my kids, and I'm really lucky I have children that talk to me and that I do spend time with. And it's more important to me than the networking, honestly. I'd love to go play golf with a bunch of people, but I enjoy the time with my children.
How do the female firefighter recruits keep up with the male firefighter recruits? I mean, are there differences in terms of actually passing the tests? Because it's incredible physical challenges that you have to do.
I think it's exactly the same. We do exactly the same thing. I remember years ago there was a female recruit who had just had a child, and I don't know how she did that. When you're breastfeeding and pumping, I think that's one of the biggest challenges is when you're actually pregnant and breastfeeding and raising your very small children. As they get older, they kind of take care of themselves.
Physically, what do you have to do to pass that test?
Oh, to pass the original coming in test. I'm not really sure the exact process. I know when I came in, we had to run 1.5 miles at, I think it was 7 minutes a mile, so whatever time that was, swim a couple of 100 meters, drag a dummy.
A guy.
Jerry.
She told me they had to wait about the same as a guy. Didn't you tell? I really wasn't being sexist.
It's simply incredible in terms of what all of the recruits can do. And Richie, you mentioned something about breastfeeding, and I have a question for Teresa. This is from Patricia via email. She wants to know the importance of supporting breastfeeding women in the workplace, and especially those who wish to return to their jobs and continue expressing milk. What do you know about that?
Well, the good thing is that with the Affordable Care Act now, there's a requirement for employers to be able to offer lactation space for breastfeeding employees. So that's something that is gotten more visibility because of that sort of federal requirement. And then I'll do my plug for when we're working with the university is students are not covered under employees in terms of needing space, requiring space for lactation, but the Women's Center and Student Services were like, okay, so you can't just say that, oh, they're not employees, so we're not required to do it, because you still have breastfeeding students. So I think that employers are required to make accommodation for breastfeeding employees, and that's a good change that we've seen in the last 2 years. And it's a big change because it allows women to breastfeed and to pump longer.
You know, when I had 2 children during working as a firefighter, and I also worked as a substitute teacher. And you know, you might say that they have to have it available, but I remember pumping in the restroom stall at school, and it's really hard to concentrate. And you know, the fact that they have to have it, I think the women have to be willing to ask for it too. And I think we don't always ask for our rights. I'm not.
I think that that's true, that a lot of times people aren't aware of what their rights are and aren't necessarily sure about, because depending upon your workplace, especially if it's smaller, there's more social peer pressure about what you ask for or not ask for. And actually, the horror stories of pumping in restrooms has become much more commonplace as a horror story with these new regulations, because it requires that it cannot be a restroom facility. So, and it needs to have certain parameters for privacy. And I think people, if you have respect for your coworkers, and you can find a way to make it work, that's what people do. I think, as we know, as an island and other places, like space is always at a premium, right? So people are like, you know, when are we gonna be able to like not have to share this office for something? But like at the Women's Center, we had students who would be, there was no place for them to do, to pump. And so it would be like, okay, well, you can take my office because it has a door. And then I'm like, okay, and then there were more and more. And it was like, okay, I have an office because I have a job. And but what about, you know, women who are clerical workers who don't have offices with doors? So so that's the part about finding, it's like it's not a disability, but it's like a disability where people are making reasonable accommodations so that women can continue to breastfeed and to pump.
Now, one of the things you're talking about is women advocating for themselves. And Jerry, you work with women in terms of being their employer. And talking about pay, how are things different when you're negotiating a salary between a woman and a man?
Well, it's really very sexist. I must admit, almost everyone in my office is a woman. I think I have 3 men. I have 3 women out at the warehouse, but the rest are. And I've just always felt that women had less chances. So if I had a choice and I had equal candidates, I would hire a woman. And I've had a whole lot of them come through who were pregnant, and we always had a quiet room or a special room where I actually designed it in when we designed our offices, just because you knew you needed a place and it should be quiet and meditative and had refrigerator facilities and the ability, and I kind of, because there were so many of us as women, nobody batted an eyelash. I mean, seriously, someone just did a blanket and we're sitting there. I got two interior designers just working away.
What about in terms of women advocating for themselves, whether it be pay, time off? Do you see that women advocate less than men?
I think so. I think we're kind of conditioned not to be bossy. And there's studies that show that women tend to be team players more, and they'll think of themselves as lucky, like Sheryl Sandberg said, that people said, oh, she's just lucky, you know. But a man would say, oh, great, it's because I'm so smart and everything. Yeah. It is true. They have studies like that. And so we're kind of conditioned to be a little bit more reserved and not brag and push teamwork, which is actually great for the workplace. Because
so do you find that the women in your workplace, they're not asking for the big raise? They're not asking for more money or for the promotion as, let's say, the men in your
nonprofit?
You know,
nonprofits tend to attract women, and It's true.
It's very true.
Yeah, and you know, I've been in the law firm where you're billing every 6 minutes and everything, and I know that it's really important for there to be flex time. It doesn't cost any more, right? And just to be able to allow people to do their thing.
Can I, Helena,
Yes.
want to share a resource that the American Association of University Women, AUW, had identified that young women's lack of negotiating for their pay was an area that was ripe for development. And so actually they have a whole training session called Start Smart. And it's about teaching college-aged women and young adults how women to do market research so you know what the job pays and that it's not about you, it's about the job and who's performing the job, and how to negotiate, some negotiating skills. Because as most people in retrospect will find that if you don't negotiate your first pay, that becomes the foundation for all your future raises. If you get a 3% raise, but you started back, and that's part of how you get these accumulated differences in pay between men and women who work at the same offices. And so it's a really great program, and I think one of the things about teaching people, particularly women, so that they can develop skills that they need. And you know, I share the same things with my coworkers who are looking for a new job, or people you know who are job. It's like, it's not about you, it's about what can you provide for your family, and the more and better you negotiate, the better for your family. And I think the other element is that equal pay is good for everybody. It's not just good for that particular employee, it's good for her family, it's good for the economy. It brings more money into that household.
Richie, are pay differences even an issue in the fire department?
No. I think we just limit ourselves if we choose to get promoted or not, and that's whether you're male or female. You know, what are our priorities at the time? If you want to move up and get promoted, you study more, you pass your interview. But it just depends on what you want to do as an individual. I think men tend to be a little more competitive. They possibly have the support of a woman at home to help them with their children, and so then they can be more competitive and they work harder to get promoted faster. But it's still all individually. I think it just what we want to do, if we want to get promoted early or not.
You know, it's interesting that it brings up sort of just being feminine in the workplace. You know, in the 70s, women were burning their bras, and sometimes women show their bras in the workplace a little bit. Coralie, is there a good way of using femininity, let's say in negotiations or in the workplace or in the boardroom?
I think that you can be tough but yet respected and show your femininity. And I think that women have more emotional IQ. And I think when the economy kind of collapsed, that we were able to rebound a little bit better. We were more flexible and everything. So I think that showing that we have these skills of negotiating and getting along is really valuable to the company, and that we should show that side of us.
Teresa, Betsy from Hawai'i Kai wants to expand on why women get less money, other than motherhood.
Other than
what
motherhood?
What are the other reasons for that?
So other than the cultural resistance to negotiating, which we're trying to, one is cultural expectations, right? As we said, that is somebody going to call this man as assertive and skilled, or is she lucky and whatever. But the other part is actually, the caller brought it back to actually parenthood. There's more and more research now showing that when people look into the reasons for the discrepancies in earnings for women, is that it's not just a gendered gap, but actually there's a parenthood gap, and that taking yourself out of the workforce for a while, which sometimes people do when they have a child, contributes to pay disparities, as well as employers' expectations that you're going to become pregnant, or once you have children, the workplace is no longer going to be your primary focus. And I think part of that is encouraging, like Jerry said, is that all of us should be thinking that it's good for all of our families if all of our employees spend time with their family.
Well, tonight we're asking what struggles remain for women in the workplace. We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Call 973-1000 on Oahu and at 1-800-283-4847 from the neighbor islands. Now, Jerry, many years ago, you made the jump from being the employee to the employer. How did that happen, and why did you make that decision?
I was running a territory for a company in Seattle and did a very huge project, and ended up, it was the HMSA building. And at the end of it, I found out that my commission check had been shorted by about $87,000. And the way I found out was a former colonel friend here, and his wife had moved to Seattle, and I got her a job as in the mother company, and everybody forgot in 5 years that she knew me. And so during the process of doing the commission, she had to sit through all these meetings with 3 men going, there is no way a woman's going to make that much money. And she said they just began backloading all kinds of expenses against the job. So when the commission report came over, I got a FedEx one from her, and it was all highlighted, and she said, take this to your attorney and to a CPA. These are all bogus, and you can prove it, and I will testify. But I was crushed because I just really, felt bad. So what I decided to do instead was I was going to leave. And then it was a question of, God, do I want to work for somebody else? And then I found out that there was an opportunity to you have to have a dealership, a license. And there was one available from a guy who had retired here from town. So like an idiot, I made the leap. And I said, one of the funny things, you might be a wonderful salesperson, but that doesn't make you a business owner. I mean, I got an MBA on the run. I mean, you have to learn all of the things that go into starting and growing a business. But it was well worth it. I don't think I had anywhere else to go. I think a lot of women find that you just either have to make that decision. Do I want to just go to work for somebody else and maybe expose yourself again to the discrimination? And it was a very clear decision that I also said I would do it very differently.
What would you do differently?
For one thing, because I was always in sales, I said, if they're doing their job, they should be paid, and they should be paid according to what we agreed and negotiated. And I've always been an advocate, I think, for supporting, because they earned it. I mean, that's the way I just look at it. And I know I have a lot. My top salespeople have been women.
Well, Coralie, you're in the Board of Regents at UH, and you deal with students. A lot of them don't receive classes for women in terms of pay, in terms of succeeding in the workplace. What kinds of educational opportunities would you advocate for?
I really like the idea that they get negotiating classes, and we just have to be a little bit more assertive, because we can do everything that men can do. And I think encouraging them to go for higher education, and right now we are up there in medical school and law school. Most of the graduates, 60% are women. Yeah. So I think just encouraging the education, and then having more women at the top will help bring up the bottom.
Richie, do you think that we'll ever see the day when HFD will have a female chief?
I'm sure we'll have a female battalion chief, Fire 1, the main chief. That might take a little while, mainly because we don't have enough women in the fire department. And
does HFD actively recruit women?
I don't really know if they actively recruit. I think we try to go out in the public and encourage the younger girls in the schools and ask them if they want to be firefighters. And I think that's where it basically starts from, is when we do our static displays, when we have the children come to the fire station, that we encourage the young children that it's not just boys, it's also girls.
And what's your reaction when you deal with these really young kids?
The young kids, they don't realize that there is a gap. They don't know. They're just children. I think what they see us doing, they know that they have a bunch of role models in anything, as mothers, as CEOs, as firefighters, as police officers. They see it. So I think the future will have a lot more firefighters. But it all has to do with parenthood too. You know, as mothers, we do stop ourselves. We want to be home with our kids when we're younger. And you said there's the gap, right? There's that gap of I need 4, 5, 6, 10 years to raise my kids, and then I can become a firefighter or a CEO. And we just do that because we sacrifice for our own children.
Do you think it's harder for moms to get hired than dads?
No, I think it all just depends on us. And we're the ones who limit ourselves on anything we want to do.
Teresa, what are the protections in place for women with children in the workplace? Obviously, we talked about breastfeeding earlier, but are there other protections?
Well, not necessarily for women with children, because most of the gender protections are for women in general, and that parenthood status is not a federally protected category. Because that's how we have rights and protections for other identities that we might have. But actually, parenthood is one of those things that's like when we talk about flexibility and about encouraging employers and male and female employees to participate in family care, is that it's not a protected activity. So you have the ability to take unpaid time off if you have a child. And because it's unpaid, it really limits the number of people who can participate.
Jerry, what have you told your daughters about fighting discrimination in the workplace?
Well, both my daughters work in the business, so they've got firsthand. And actually, it's just
is it a conversation, or do you do more leading by action?
I think it's a conversation. One of the my daughter she's going to hate me, 49 on Sunday, and she's got 2 children, my 2 grandsons. And there are a lot of accommodations, and I think, again, she does feel like, yeah, I have the flexibility to be the president of the football team, and Bruce coaches, but they have that freedom that maybe not everybody else, that, like you say, a regular clerical worker would not be able to take off at 3 o'clock every afternoon from August to November to be a coach, whether it's a man or a woman. But I think as women particularly, but I think because it's a family business, I think people really like that because they know that there's a real awareness and a sensitivity and a respect for parenthood. And I have an enormous number of women who support their whole families. I mean, they're supporting their parents, and they work really hard, and they know that it's respected. And there is a lot of flexibility with being able to work from home, and not the kind of rigidity to an office that I think traditionally went on.
I'd like to follow up just that one of the things about flexible workplaces is that people talk about it doesn't just benefit the employee, right? It also benefits the employer, that people gain, are more likely to stay at a place that gives them more flexibility. Sometimes I think we had a discussion earlier, women will trade wages if they can get more flexibility, or they'll work for a smaller family office because it will allow them to have more flexibility for the rest of their family life. And unfortunately, when we look at the kinds of jobs that our economy has here in Hawaii, when you look at retail sales, food service, those are jobs that have very little flexibility, and that a lot of times what we see is that people who earn more have more opportunities for flexibility, even if you don't take them because you're trying to increase your status in your office, but that people who work in lower wage jobs really have very little flexibility. And there's also a national push for paid sick leave. So
do you think the rise in the minimum wage will help in this flexibility at all?
Well, I don't think it helps with flexibility, but actually before minimum wage passed, I would have put down that increasing minimum wage is one of the things that women workers need. So women are the overwhelming majority of minimum wage workers, and many of them are single parents. So an increase in the minimum wage is always good for women.
There are a lot of employers that continue to fight against increasing the minimum wage. And Jerry, what do you make of that?
I disagree. I mean, I did disagree with not. I think we need a higher minimum wage, and I just have always felt, having been in my younger years, I worked in the operating room. Even when I was director of family planning, I took call in the OR. I worked 2 and 3 jobs most of my life, so I understand how much it takes to raise a family, and so I think I've got a real awareness on what it takes.
So even as an employer, you would advocate for paying more?
Yeah. Well, no,
because that impacts your bottom
you can't
line.
even. I know, but you can't. You really do know that no one can make it on even on minimum wage. That's why you can do the numbers and you say, what would it take? I mean, if you're working, I don't care where you are, whether it's McDonald's or, it's just not. The numbers don't work in Hawaii particularly. And one of the things in Hawaii, at least here, if they're full-time workers, they get health care. I mean, when I left, now they have it, but in Boston and in most states, employer-provided health care was not mandated. I don't even know how they do it, because you're just afloat. I mean, I really feel so sad and sorry, because I just think, particularly single women with children, we do not honor it, we don't respect it in this society, and we just really feel like it's her problem and she shouldn't have those kids anyway, and there's all this negative stuff that goes behind it. We don't value, we say we do, but we don't value children and we don't value parenthood.
Corley, you look like you want to add something.
No, I was going to say that if you allow people to earn more money in that one job, then maybe they don't have to take the other job, and they'll have more time for their families. And it's not only women, but men as well,
In Hawaii,
to be able to make a fair living.
Yeah, I know that even when hotel workers are talking about, most of them also have second jobs. And so in some workplaces, when people are asked, or for nurses, I know a big thing is that they are mandated for their overtime. They can't leave until the replacement comes, similar to the security in prisons. It's that then they miss their second job, and then they also can't get home to pick up their kids from childcare. It's that inflexible hours, not just not being able to leave so you can be part of your child's after school activities, but to be required to stay at work longer impacts you financially as well as engaging with your family.
Teresa, there have been statistics that, men, let's say in school, they don't earn the high grades, but they're still the ones who get the higher paying, higher powered jobs than women. Why is that?
I think some of it has to do with expectation, that people have expectations that men are going to do well, and that if you hire them, I don't know that men who don't get good grades get great jobs. I have to say, I'm not sure. I think what you can say is that women can perform better and they won't necessarily earn the same. So I think a lot of it has to do with assertiveness and expectations that employers have that he's going to do a good job. And
Richie, when you're out in the community, obviously you're just a minority in the Honolulu Fire Department. When you're out in the community, what's the reaction from the public?
I'm really surprised that there's a lot of elderly men, like in their 80s, Asian, that are so supportive, and I'm really surprised to see that they talk about we should have a female president, that we would have more peace in the world. I get those kinds of comments about that women are more peaceful. And
have you ever gotten a negative reaction for being a firefighter?
only when I first came into the fire department, there's still, just that old mentality, but not in the past 10 years, I would say. It's all positive.
What was it like in, let's say, your first day on the job? Was there that awkward feeling? People didn't quite know how to treat you?
No, the only awkwardness was my first battalion chief, that I remember him sitting down saying, you know, I really don't believe women should be in the fire department.
Oh, wow.
But you know, when he retired, he hugged me and he just says, you know, you're just like my daughter and I just love you. So there's just a change, you know, over the years. I think we're just really lucky. The women, the young girls of today are really lucky. They come into a whole different world.
Mm-hmm. Corley, did you ever experience negativity in terms of trying to climb the ladder?
No.
Like, why aren't you staying at home with your family?
Actually, in my law firm, which was only men, all of their wives stayed at home. So they kind of looked at me like, why aren't you there too? And I remember years later, one of the partners that had a family later in life then realized, wow, how did you do it? I said, see? So, you know, I think they have to experience it themselves. And women nowadays, the younger ones, are kind of demanding that their spouse take more share. And then that will help them grow.
Jerry, why don't you talk about that? You know, there's the conflict between different types of women. There's the women who work, and then there's the stay-at-home moms. And sometimes they talk about each other in maybe negative ways. Can you talk about that?
Well, as someone who always had to work, so it was not an elective, and I would say that's true for most women. I mean, statistically, it's a very small number, and it's what the media focuses on, is the ones who do get their degree and then drop out, and some of us do get a little irritated because you sort of, God, they're wasting it, but they're not in the one sense. This generation, as opposed to mine, it really was, and that's why you will find so many that never had children. A lot of them didn't marry because they really felt they had to make that big choice, and that focus had to be you were either going to go all the way to the top, and some were lucky enough to get spouses that were supportive. But I'd say the majority, out of the 70s and 80s, you really just made a choice. Someone like me, like I said, I just had to work, and so it was never, it wasn't, well, I think I'll just won't work this year. That just wasn't on the table.
Teresa, Nancy from Honolulu says she'd like one of our panel members to address battered women in the workplace.
Okay, actually, one of the protections for women at work actually is about having leave so that you can address domestic violence. And one of the other things actually I hear on my What Women Need at Work was violence-free communities, actually. A workplace that is supportive of and understands how to support their typically mostly female victims of violence, and that doesn't then become a place at work where you're also trying to like deal with other people's questions, or that your employer's afraid that your batterer is going to come to their workplace. So a good thing with the Hawaii State leave is that you can have, and even in smaller workplaces, up to 5 days off. And the other part is I think there's more attention to sort of anti-violence prevention and encouraging people to be supportive at work, and to not have domestic violence be that kind of silent, unknown violence that's in our community.
You know, Richie, Amy from Honolulu says there's been a lot of talk about women in the workplace and giving suggestions for women, but what are the suggestions for men to help women in the workplace?
To help women in the workplace? I think it's all about respect. I think everybody, men or women, if we're respectful for each other, we have a better workplace. So I think for the most part, men do respect women, and that's the only difference, I would think. Yeah.
Jerry, do you have any thoughts on that? What would be your advice to men?
Like I say, I'm seeing a big generational shift. I think younger men are more egalitarian and more respectful, and there are times, even with my son-in-law, when he said something like babysitting, and I'm like, no, you don't babysit your own children. they're your children. But it's shifted, and I know he's way more participative. And I know a lot of men who are in that generation. They've become much more participative in raising children and being really an integral part of their families. I think I lost my train of thought.
Actually, Coralie, let me ask you. Earlier you mentioned more women being in nonprofits. Why is it that some industries like nonprofits attract more women?
Well, I think that we're more caring anyway, and nonprofit, it's not the bottom line. Although we do run it as a business, it's just a chance to be able to help people, and that does bring out our nurturing, And also, there are more women at the top in nonprofits, and we understand. I want somebody to go to their May Day program because I remember that I missed my kids when I was at a law firm, and so we try extra hard because we've been through it to be able to make sure that our women and men under us are able to participate in their family fully.
Richie, are there any flexibilities for you in terms of your schedule, or are you just on or off, or can you decide when you're going to work?
We have a set schedule. Of course, if there are family emergencies, as we're all family oriented, there is a way to have to leave the station, but for the most part, we're on duty. If I had to leave for an emergency, I could call my boss. He could have someone else come in and work for me, and so I could mitigate my family emergency. But we have to be there. I can't leave my work unless I have my replacement comes, though. So basically, I can't just run away.
Lloyd from Waialae wants to know from Jerry, if two candidates for a job, one male, one female, have the same training, they're the same age, but the woman has left for 5 years for child raising, should they receive the same pay?
Yeah. I actually think when the woman comes back and she's much more better, she's better at multitasking.
That's true.
And she has developed a whole lot of other skills, maybe not the climbing the ladder skills, but she's much more valuable and integrative in the workplace because she had to develop I find them much, I'd say all mine are, like I said, most of them are women, and they're almost all mothers. But if I were hiring one, I think men can tend to be too focused and too narrow.
But for someone who has left the workplace for a while to raise their kids, isn't it much more difficult to get back in?
It depends on the particular position they're coming back into. Obviously, if you were in IT and you didn't keep up, but a lot of women do and did. They do things at home, right? They continue to develop skills. They just did it by doing it from home and working from home, which I find a lot of them do. Same thing. I have a lot of interior designers, and they most of mine want to work from home. They find that it's they get more work done. They said, I'm not as distracted, and I can work at midnight. Some of them, it really allows for particularly creatives to say, oh my God, I'm at my best from like 9 to 3. I'm like, Lord Almighty, I'm in bed at 9. but it's a real, it's having that flexibility. We've really changed a lot. And it's tough on me. I used to be so by the book. But I realized the need for the flexibility, and mostly because I had women, and like I said, so many of them are actually the major breadwinners in their families.
I wanted to go back to Richie and talk about your role as a captain. You have to give commands and orders to mostly men. What is that like for you?
Well, there's a fine line, and I'm also a new captain, so I'm just really blessed to have hardworking men who really know what to do. They're just really highly trained. So it's just a matter of guiding and making sure everybody's safe. So I'm finding that there are a few challenges because men tend to be a little more assertive, but for the most part, I'm working it out.
Coralie, how does a woman learn to be a leader? Because for most people, it's not innate.
Yeah, I think just be confident in yourself and look at the role models and know that we can do anything. And people will follow when you're passionate about something. And that's why I think with nonprofits or even businesses, when you're at the top and you own it, you can lead others and because you're passionate and you're willing to do the work as well.
Can you talk about that, Teresa, a little bit more in terms of in the workplace?
Well, I was going to add, when we're talking about what is it that men can do, and one of the things is offer leadership opportunities and to mentor your female employees. And like Richie was saying, that when people have respect amongst all coworkers, that's the best. And I think that part of it, when people, your earlier question about when women come back from child rearing is, other than working for Jerry, many employers will actually take advantage of the fact that they'll say, well, you haven't been in the workplace and the last amount you earned was this. And so that sort of contributes to women's falling behind. But certainly women's development and leadership is having confidence, which I think also is something to learn and to not be tentative about, and to share amongst others opportunities where you get to develop your skills and you have opportunities to lead.
Well, on that note, Teresa, I think we might be seeing more women leaders out of this conversation. But wanted to thank all of the panelists here tonight for a lively conversation and for certainly adding more to what we see out there in the workplace. Thank you all for tonight.
Thank you.
Well, next time on Insights, in 2 weeks, Insights on PBS Hawaii will begin a series of programs focusing on the contests in the upcoming primary and general elections. Our first show will feature 2 key state Senate races, the Democratic primary for Senate District 4 on Hawaii Island between Senator Malama Solomon and former Hawaii County Mayor Lorraine Inouye, and the Republican primary race for Senate District 23 from Kaneohe to the North Shore of Oahu between Representative Richard Fale and former Representative Colleen Meyer. That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Mahialani Richardson. Ahui ho.